If communication is the foundation of performance, what happens when it starts to fracture? In this episode of Real Impact, I'm joined by Dr. Amanda Potter, a chartered psychologist and the host of the Chief Psychology Officer podcast. We unpack the reality of communication breakdown, where clarity is lost, trust is fragile, and teams default to the path of least resistance. This conversation challenges some of the most commonly accepted ideas about how organisations communicate and perform. We explore topics from psychological safety and hybrid working to leadership behaviours and cognitive diversity. Because when people don't feel safe to speak up, even the best intentions can quietly unravel. Let's get into it. Welcome, Amanda, to the Real Impact podcast. Thank you so much for joining me here today. It's really great to have you here. Today, we are talking about communication and specifically communication breakdown in organisations. But before we get into it, please, could you just introduce yourself?
I'm Amanda. I'm a psychologist. I've been in this game now for about 30 plus years, without giving my age away. And I love working with organisations to help make them more successful. So I'm a researcher and neuroscientist and psychologist, but also have a podcast. So I've been podcasting for the last 4 years. And so it's my absolute passion to bring all of the research and thinking from psychology together in a really useful format that organisations can use. And so hopefully can answer a few questions on communication today.
Fantastic. So we'll get straight into it. First sort of high-level question. Why is communication and good communication important to people and humans?
It's pretty much fundamental, isn't it? If we don't communicate, how can we create clarity? So for organisations to be high-performing, for individuals to feel like they're contributing, there needs to be clarity. And we don't get clarity without communicating. So communication is the true foundation of success. And so if we don't have communication, then how do people understand what their job is and what they're supposed to do? And it's making me think about the fact that the real essence of organisations is purpose. Why do teams come together? Why do organisations exist? And without communication, we can't have that.
And that sounds obvious and really simple, but I often hear that it goes wrong. People don't know what they're doing. People don't know what their purpose is, the organisation's purpose is. So what are some of the reasons for that?
So there's a couple, actually. One is trust. So there's a lack of trust. What's really interesting is if you go into a room feeling cautious and sceptical, you're unlikely to create trusting partnerships and connections. If you go into a room or a team with a trusting outlook, believing that everybody in the room's intention is good, you are more likely to create connections, positive connections. And so I talk a lot about this thing called psychological safety. And psychological safe teams are teams that openly communicate. They challenge each other, they ask good questions, they ask the silly questions. And without it, it's really difficult to build that trust. And so in order to build trust, you need to have personal connection, though. You need to be interested and engaged in the lives of your colleagues as humans and as people, not just as professionals. And so there's a whole load of things that I'm kind of connecting here. There's trust, there's personal connection, there's relationships, and all of that. If you do all of that well, it starts to really create a good sort of level of clarity about who each person is, why they are in the team, and the role that they play.
That makes complete sense. And a phrase that sort of pops into my mind there was bringing your whole self to work. I hear that a lot. So you alluded to the fact that to build psychological safety, we need to know about each other and our teams. How do you create the environment where people want to bring their whole self to work? If that's something that creates psychological safety, but the psychological safety need to be there to
for that to happen.
To do that. Yeah, exactly.
I find it fascinating that so many organisations now have that as one of their values, that they want people to bring them whole selves to work, because actually the research suggests that people have a work and a home persona. that actually they have their work shoes on self and then their slippers on self, if you like.
Yeah.
So do we really want people to bring their whole self to work? Really? Because actually we want people to be highly productive, efficient. We want them to be polite. We want them to be maybe a bit more risk-seeking than they might be at home, or risk-avoidant than they are at home. So it's a really interesting thing that we want people to be that authentic. Do organisations truly want people to be that authentic at work? It's a kind of one question. The point you were saying is that actually, unless people are themselves, if they're faking it to make it, or they're playing a role or trying to be something they're not, then they're not going to create an environment where people feel safe to speak up, to challenge. So there's a balance, I believe, because we're on best behaviour, aren't we, at work, in the same way as we learned at school. We can't we can't just think, I can't be bothered to do the washing up tonight, I'll do it tomorrow morning. You can't think, I can't be bothered to do that proposal today, I'll just not submit it. You have to be always performing at your very best in that environment. So it's almost, even though it's bring yourself to work, it's bring that very best version of yourself to work.
Yeah. The
person you would hope to be and want to be.
This reminded me when you were talking there of, so I studied sociology at university, and there was a sociologist called Irving Goffman.
Okay.
He might have bridged into psychology as well.
I don't know.
But he did a study on exactly that, and the different personas people adopt in different environments, and how sort of different environments you're in are different scenes, and you're an actor who plays a different role in a different environment. So
it's a really interesting point, because one of the things that we've really identified working with leaders across the world is that the leaders who try the hardest, who are the most relentless and push the hardest, are the ones that have the opposite impact of the one they want. They create toxic environments. And so if you think about that point I mentioned earlier, that rather than just bring yourself to work, you want someone to bring their best version of themselves. If we're constantly pushing for best, we're actually overusing some of those strengths. We're driving too hard, and we create this relentless work environment. And it's when we create that relentless work environment, coming back to your original question, communication starts to break down, because they're driving and pushing in a single direction. There's no way to communicate with them because it's their way only. And so one of the things that's absolutely critical for creating an environment of psychological safety, which is fundamentally about really good open communication, is an environment where people are really prepared to listen and prepared to understand that they could be wrong and could understand that they could make mistakes and be flexible and so on.
To play devil's advocate to that, what if there is a known way of doing things that gets results? How do you encourage open communication and challenge and all of that stuff you just mentioned in situations where there is a way of doing things, it always delivers results, and the organisation has performed well because of that?
Such a great question, because so many organisations rely on exactly that, and they will come to us as an organisation and say, we know this approach works, so we'd like you to hire people or help us assess execs or senior leaders or whoever it might be to do more of that, please, because in the past that has worked. The reality is the research has identified that very single-minded focus or attention on a single way of working and operating is actually quite destructive for organisations. Because humans are so unique, you and I are so unique from one another, even though we're sitting in the same room here today. Each of us bring different qualities to the room. And true innovation, true risk-taking, true expansion of ideas comes from something called cognitive diversity. And that's where you and I challenge each other. So you, the sociologist, me, the psychologist, we come from different sides, so we're able to really debate.
Yeah.
But if we were both pure psychologists, we'd be both celebrating how fabulous we are, and we'd both be agreeing with each other, and we wouldn't be thinking beyond our own current ideas. And so to answer your question, if an organisation says to me, look, we've got a single way which we know works, I will be challenging them to say, actually, what else? What else could you do? And I would actively want them to bring other people into the team who are very different from that approach, because that was where you get the real innovation, the real problem solving and the real growth.
Yeah, and the other parts of that is, yes, that approach might work now, but things are changing all the time in the world, and the external influences to that company. So 2 years down the line, that might not be
absolutely
the way to do things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, goodness me, that we've seen with AI, we have to be agile. We have to adapt.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Well, I mean, if you go back 10 years and look at companies that have sort of fallen by the wayside, like Blockbuster, for example, Nokia, exactly.
There's some great examples out there, aren't there?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, maybe great wasn't the right word.
Notable.
Notable, better word.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so bring it back to psychological safety. Was it easier to create those environments, again, 10 years ago, where people worked more in person and together and collaborated face-to-face, versus now, where a lot of teams are completely remote and work in hybrid?
So it's always hard to create truly psychologically safe teams. So Professor Amy Edmondson, who's the absolute guru of psychological safety, if you listen to her on any of the podcasts that she's been on, she will talk about the fact that she rarely, or if ever, has met a team that is truly psychologically safe. And we've assessed thousands of people around the world, literally in every continent, across lots of global organisations, and we found the same. It's rare, really rare, that you find a team that's truly psychologically safe. So it's the holy grail, if you like. And the reality is it's harder now, to answer your question. The reason it's harder is because of hybrid. And hybrid is a bit like cake. So I love cake, but it's not great for me. And hybrid, people want hybrid working, but it's not great for them. It's not great for them because of the impact it has on their resilience and on their psychological safety. So we've done a big study with hundreds of people from around the world looking at the impact of hybrid working on how they feel, or their climate, so psychological safety, and how they experience emotions, so their resilience, and therefore the impact on their behaviour and how they cope with difficulty. And we found in that research that people who work in a hybrid environment are the least psychologically safe. And the reason for that, when we delved further through case studies, is because they're never in one place nor another. They're never quite in the room. Meetings, they've got half people in the room, half not. Some people feel like they're missing out on those water cooler conversations. And so there's always that sense of FOMO. I'm always missing out on something, and am I really being included? And if you think then about the resilience, the fight or flight response, the amygdala, which is our emotion centre, what's happening is we're on alert. So to shortcut that, hybrid sends our brains on to the alert system. It means that we're constantly scanning the environment to protect ourselves from threat, or we disengage. We think, actually, I'm out. I'm tapping out. I'm going to be a passive passenger, and I'm just going to sit in the background and just ride this one out until someone notices. And so that's quite an extreme point I'm making here, but the data is pretty clear. Sadly, for people who like cake, myself included, the most safe environments are in person. So to your point, 10 years ago, it would have been easier. So it's in person, then fully remote, and then hybrid.
Okay. What have you seen any of your clients start to take notice of this and change the way they're working and operating their businesses?
Yes, and I'm really glad you asked the question, because I was wanting to tell you the answer. So yes, and the ones that are doing it well are doing it with structure, with clarity. Again, it comes back to clarity. And so the ones that are doing hybrid well are really clear about which days are office days and which days are home days. So whilst people who want hybrid want it because of lifestyle, because it fits around them, actually when it works is when there's an agreement in the team, what days they're going in, where they're going to work in the building. So one of our clients has got coloured zones, and they agree which coloured zone they're all going to reside in for that day. And they also agree when they're going to have social time and where that social time is. So it's pre-organised. Because back to that point around communication, the essence and the foundation of psychological safety is trust, purpose, belonging, and personal connection. And we need to actually interact with another person in person to do that, to build that. And so actually just going to work and then being on Teams calls all day is not the point.
It's being in the room with people.
Being in the room with people and having real conversations.
Is there, if you overlay generations or age, probably age, as a lens looking at psychological safety and psychological safety in the context of hybrid working, are there differences between the impact of hybrid on psychological safety based on age group?
I'm going to answer the question in a slightly different way, which is when you have teams that have got demographic diversity, particularly age is the best one. And also, actually, there's two. There's age and longevity in an organisation. So if you have a team of people who have got cognitive diversity due to age and longevity, what happens is the conversations are richer and therefore people feel safer. And so that's the data that we have, is that greater cognitive diversity results in greater psychological safety because the conversations are richer and more diverse. And there's also some other data that shows that as we get older, we're more resilient. We're more emotionally intelligent, very gratefully, but we're also more resilient because our resilience comes from us facing into difficulty, learning from it, neuroplasticity, and therefore creating the neural pathway to understand that if I was to face that challenge again, I know how to deal with it. And so all of that, to now answer your question, points to the idea that the older we become, the better we are at dealing with difficulty, and therefore we are able to face with the challenges of things like hybrid working better. Because we're less... In my world, for example, I'm quite an impulsive person. That's one of my risks. As I get older, in theory, I should become less impulsive or less impatient. They're two of my risks, actually.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So let's look at organisations that have moved fully remote with a young workforce. How can they, number one, build resilience, and two, with the view to that leading psychological safety in their organisation, if they're not going to do things in person, which we know is really important?
It's so important. And actually, it depends on the individual, because now we're talking about personality characteristics. Because for some people, working independently, remotely, is exactly what they wanted, because they're introverted and they have a low need for inclusion and affection from others. And so it absolutely suits them. Whereas other people were completely opposite. They're highly extrovert. They have a high need for inclusion and a high need for affection from others. And therefore, just every day will be a drain for them. So it really, truly depends on the individual. But if I go back to the organisational need, the organisation needs for each of the people in the team to trust one another enough to speak up, to whistleblow if there's a challenge. So I'm going to make up some of these details because I want to not give away a client's details.
Okay.
But we had a client who had I'm going to change the number, but it's relative, a 500 million euro product recall. And that product recall resulted in about 15 million devices being pulled from different organisations. And that organisation had known that technology was not working, but no one was prepared to speak up and to challenge, because in that organisation there was an environment of a fear of failure, a need to please, a deference to leadership, and a consensus culture. So all of those four things I've just listed are the opposite to psychological safety. Now, the reason for that is because everyone was truly motivated to do the best job they could. And so they wanted to please. They didn't want to get it wrong. They didn't want to make a mistake by saying they didn't think it worked. I mean, I say they knew that there was inklings. And so therefore, we need to be in a position that the people who are thinking, I'm sure this is wrong, actually ask those questions. And if they are pushed back, then they push again. They try harder. But the issue is environment and how somebody feels has a massive impact on how someone speaks and behaves.
Yeah.
So,
Are there in psychologically safe organisations, what sort of events or series of events can damage that and completely erode psychological safety?
I'm going to now think about another client, which again I'm going to try and keep anonymous, which is it. One of the things that I see particularly is very dogmatic leadership. So autocratic, dogmatic, micromanaging leadership from the top down. CEOs who need to be in every meeting, who need to be part of every decision, who need to control outcomes. Because two of the positive impacts of psychological safety and positive communication, which you're talking about, is decision-making and accountability. We need leaders to be decisive. We don't want them to be risk-seeking to the point that they're just impulsive, but we need them to be able to make decisions and be prepared to make decisions and take accountability for outcomes. But they can't do that if they don't feel like they're in the right environment. So, have I answered your question?
Yes, and I suppose if that safety is lost, can it be rebuilt?
That was the point.
Yeah.
Yes. So the micromanaging is one issue. And can it be rebuilt? Yes, if that person who is, or people who are micromanaging are prepared to change. You can't build psychologically a safe environment or an environment of highly effective, high performance communication if you've got leadership that's role modelling behaviours that's the opposite, clearly.
Yeah.
So something needs to change. You have to be quite radical with that change. But there is another example, which is a real risk. And this is the essence of a book that I'm currently writing, or just finishing writing after a number of years, and hopefully will get published soon. And the essence of the book is the path to hell is paved with great intention. Not good, but great intention. And some of the hardest working leaders that I've worked and I've coached and I've seen and I've worked with can at times create the most relentless, ruthless environments, toxic environments, because they're so committed, so hardworking, so driven that they don't realise the impact they're having on their teams. And so the whole book is about actually the friction that can create and some of the habits that those leaders could implement quite simply to really change the environment into a much more successful one.
Fantastic. Thinking about something tangible that we can give viewers and listeners of this podcast. What can leaders do what signals can leaders look for in their organisations by way of an audit to measure or get an inkling of current levels of psychological safety?
Well, there are some tools and diagnostics out there. We have one. So I didn't introduce the company very well, but I'm from a company called Be Talent. And we have a diagnostic. So we have a psychological safety questionnaire, and it measures 10 scales of safety. And the reason I'm mentioning it is because one of the things around psychological safety is that very often people are looking at in the wrong direction when they're trying to audit or identify whether a team is safe or not. So they will look at whether a team is nice, for example. Are we all nice to one another? That's actually a sign of low psychological safety, not a sign of good.
Being nice.
Being nice.
Okay.
Because if you're overly nice to one another, actually what you're trying to do is trying to potentially please one another, and you're not being honest. That authentic point. Again, we've gone back to the beginning of the conversation. So we want people to actually be kind. And what we mean by being kind is actually be honest, but with empathy. So there's that term radical candor. So it's about both being really quite direct, but also being quite kind in the way you deliver that message. So now to answer the question, actually some of the signs that we might see that teams are not being safe are some of the things I've just mentioned around deference to leadership. So if people are just doing what they're told, there's a concept called functional stupidity. And functional stupidity is when individuals or teams stop thinking for themselves. So it's when bright people stop thinking for themselves and they're just order takers. So another indication could be people become order takers. They stop asking questions and they stop including people in the conversation. So there's so many signs anyway.
Are there certain industries or disciplines where it's hard to avoid order takers and giving orders? If there's a set process, or let's say chefs in a kitchen, we had this analogy on another episode, but if there's a recipe to follow,
yeah,
it's a yes chef.
I'm not going. I thought I'd add a bit more salt.
Yeah, exactly.
Just thought I'd go off piste. Absolutely. Well, I was just thinking of the forces. So the other one is the forces. So one of the scales is deference to leadership, but there's certain events and situations where you absolutely have to do what you're told, of course. But there's other environments where you may be in a room trying to solve a problem and you don't want to just do what you're told. You need to bring a new idea to the table. So it's all about context. It's all about situation. But you are right. There are certain teams that we've worked with, because we do work with certain we work across so many sectors of organisations. There are certain teams where it's much tougher because of that exact argument around, but there are times we have to follow. We have to have discipline. We have to follow our orders.
Yeah. So I suppose it's identifying those times, and then when it's okay, or when there's space to bring in different perspectives, like freedom in a framework, sort of.
Yeah. I mean, takes us back to the question, why do we want people to communicate? Why do we need clarity? Why do we need purpose? Why do we need trust? And fundamentally, why do we need psychological safety? The reason why organisations want it is not only because they want people to feel included and trusted and part of something that's important, that they belong, but actually fundamentally they want to drive high-performing organisations that are successful and that are beating competitors if they're a commercial organisation, or if they're a non-commercial organisation that is doing the job that they're supposed to do within the best time, or within their financial capability. Yeah. So, and psychological safety is one of the vehicles for getting there, actually. Because if teams are prepared to speak up and challenge and ask each other questions, then they're more likely to innovate and to identify better solutions for getting there.
Amanda, we're approaching the end of this episode, and thank you. It's been really insightful so far, everything you've shared.
Thank you.
To end, can you provide something tangible that people can take away to make a difference to their lives and their organisations?
I love you've asked that question, because one of the things I always try to do on our podcast, which the Chief Psychology Officer podcast, is to always talk about something tangible for people to take away. And the tangible thing I believe for people to take away is the fact that each individual can make the greatest difference on what it feels like to work in a team. And we can do that by working on our own resilience, because how resilient we feel when we go to work has an impact on our emotions and our behaviour. And so the very simple thing of opening the curtains as soon as we wake up in the morning will help to kick in the circadian rhythm cycle, the wake and sleep cycle. Because as soon as we see outside and see the daylight or the sun rising, that's really good for our system, our brain system. So that's one really simple, small technique that we could put in a small habit. In the same way as we clean our teeth every day, just get up and open your curtains. Don't look at your blue screen every day. Another small habit could be to keep your bedroom cooler. It's supposed to be a few degrees cooler than you would be comfortable in, because then we sleep better. So we sleep more soundly and we sleep longer and we sleep deeper. So it's all about managing certain patterns. So it's not necessarily about having to change your life radically, but try to bring in some habits. Also go and stand outside in the morning if you can. If there's somewhere you can, stand outside or look outside. Another one is walking. Can you do some walking in the morning? Have coffee or tea, because caffeine's good for energising, getting you started, but don't have too much. So there's a number of habits that you can look up that has an impact on your brain and on the neuroscience, so the neurochemicals in your brain that release positive neurotransmitters. If we do all of those things in the first 8 hours of waking, they're more likely to stick and to stay with us. So you can, if they listen to my podcast actually, which is the Chief Psychology Officer, there's a whole load of episodes on the neuroscience of resilience and burnout. And in that, there's a whole load of tips on things that individuals can do to just be happier and healthier in their work environment. Because then if they turn up to work happy, everyone also is going to feel positive around them.
when organisations talk about creating psychological safety, do you think they really want it, or are they just paying lip service to it and they'd prefer just to take the path of least resistance?
Wow, that's a big question, isn't it? And the reason it's a big question is because of what happens in our brains. And organisations are made up of humans, and humans are inherently lazy. You and I, everyone is inherently lazy. And that's because we're programmed to be like that, if you like. Our brains train us to be lazy because it's all about conserving energy. Our brains like predictability, simplicity, and control. And so if we have two options, we have the hard way or the easy way. We always go for the easy way. You think about if you go to a supermarket, we park as close as we can to the door because the reason for that is that our brain is telling us to conserve energy. And so we are hardwired to conserve energy, to stay alive. And so if you think that organisations are led by people, we're always trying to conserve energy in organisations, and we're trying to find the simplest path of least resistance. And so it's a great question because actually creating an environment of psychological safety requires challenge. It requires the difficult conversations. It requires the people to speak up and to recognise that actually what's happening today is not going to work for the long term. So I think it's a really good point. And I've got proof of that because so often, actually that's probably not the right thing to say, so often, there have been times when we have identified psychological safety as the fundamental risk within an organisation, and as a result the conversation has been closed. And I had one vice chancellor say to me, I will not have psychological safety mentioned in this organisation ever again. And it was a closed conversation, and we no longer work with that organisation because the threat of change was so great that they preferred to take that path of least resistance and just stick where they are.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so we do see it, actually. It becomes a very uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah, and they've brought you in to address these issues.
Yeah, but actually it's because it's quite threatening because also it's back to that whole point. What is psychological safety? People feel like it's something that they are doing wrong or they may have caused. Is it me? And that with that one particular person, they believed that they were the risk, that they were the problem. And so therefore the threat response was, well, we're just not going to talk about this in our organisation. We'll work around it. We'll find other solutions, which of course is not the answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Amanda, this conversation has been really, really insightful. Thank you so much for joining me, for sharing your knowledge and for being so open. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome.